Welcome to another episode of Moments with Mike. I love Thanksgiving. It's my favorite holiday, but unfortunately, I think all too often now we seem to go from Halloween to Christmas and skip over that wonderful holiday that goes back to a time, earliest part of our history, when the Pilgrims and the Puritans came to this country and began to establish our nation. Today, I'd like to read to you Psalm 100 and share a few thoughts with you. And in the following episodes of Moments with Mike, as we celebrate Thanksgiving, we're going to be talking about where an attitude of gratitude springs from, how we are to maintain it, and best, how we are to give it away to others in a spirit of grace and in a thankful heart that we've been given the opportunity to do so. Psalm 100 is the only one of the Psalms that is specifically spelled out for us in verse 1 to be a psalm of thanksgiving. While it is anonymous, it is typically attributed to David, who wrote 73 of the 150 Psalms that are recorded for us. And you know that the Psalms was the worship book. It was the hymnal of the Jewish people. This one is very famous because it deals not just with the attitude of thanksgiving that should permeate our hearts and our lives, but because it gives us such a wonderful snapshot of the character of God. Allow me to read it to you. Shout joyfully to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful singing. Know that the Lord is himself God. It is he who made us, and not we ourselves. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him. Bless or speak well of his name. For the Lord is good. His loving kindness is everlasting, and his faithfulness to all generations. You will recall that God, in Deuteronomy chapter 7, out of an exercise of his will, called Israel to become his own people. He did not call them because they were more mighty politically or militarily than any of the other nations surrounding them, nor did he call them because they had the greatest population. It's simply a choice that God made. And in his call upon the nation of Israel, from the very beginning, he called them to be a light to the nations, to point people to the one God, the only God. And many times in their history, Israel did just that. And unfortunately, there are those periods of time when Israel neglected to give thanks to God and neglected their responsibility to point people to him. But here is a high watermark. This is a psalm that would be sung on the way to temple. And it begins in verse 1 by saying that we should shout joyfully to the Lord. Have you ever thought about the fact that joy and peace are primary emotions? And when we live in a period of joy, we often experience as well peace. But we're to shout joyfully to the Lord, to all the ends of the earth, so that they too would have the opportunity to put their faith and their trust in God Almighty. Joy is a contagious spirit. Just as no one really wants to be around someone who's critical and complainative, if you will, resentful or bitter. When we're around people of joy, we too can enter into that experience. And what greater place of joy than to know that we are his people. We are his creation, verse 3, and the sheep of his pasture, where God is declared then to be not just creator, but shepherd who takes good care of his sheep. In verse 2, it says that we are to serve the Lord with gladness. When we have an attitude of gratitude, we find that it's a lot easier for us to serve others around us. We're not jockeying for the top rung on the heap. We're not thinking about how other people can serve us, how other people can bless us, but it becomes the delight of our soul when we can serve others with gladness and to come before him with singing. One of the things I think we miss in not being able to gather together inside our sanctuary is the whole thought of bringing a note of praise to us and to Him. Hopefully those days when we can meet back inside will come soon. But I want to draw us attention not just to verse 1, 2, and 3, and not just to verse 4, where it says we're to enter His gates with thanksgiving and His courts with praise. I want to draw our attention at the closing of our first episode of this season marked with gratitude to the character of God found to us in verse 5. Perhaps this is what, not only as an expression people gave God thanks for in the Old Testament, and perhaps this is a note of praise for who He is by way of His character. But notice verse 5 ends with this: the Lord is good. It speaks of a moral goodness. It speaks of His moral character, that God is intrinsically good. Nahum chapter 1 and verse says, for the Lord is good, and His thoughts toward us are always good. And we know from Romans 8 that He works all things together for our good, for those who love God and are called according to the purpose of being shaped and formed into the person of Jesus. Secondly, though, we're said that His loving kindness is everlasting. From everlasting to everlasting, God has set His love upon His people. And that is such a strong word for us and such a comforting word in the time in which we live. But I like the way this psalm closes, that His faithfulness endures to all generation. That God is trustworthy. He keeps His word. He's reliable. He always acts in counsel of His own will. That He keeps His promises to His people. I hope that as you go through this season of Thanksgiving, that you'll turn often to Psalm 100 and rejoice in the goodness of our God, His mercy, His grace, and His love. God bless you.